Well, today I'm going to share with you what I think is maybe the most exciting thing I've done with Model Context Protocol and playing solo Dungeons and Dragons, with the AI. It's fun to have it create adventures and even run them for you. And it's really great if you add some additional code around it, which is why MCP becomes really helpful because you can add all sorts of little agents. And as I'm going to get in today, you can even get, I think, close to kind of what people would consider agentic AI, where the AI starts acting on its own and coming up with things with a little bit of help. Amazingly, I never actually tell you what I'm going to do here, and that is creating an MCP prompt. One of the more obscure things in the Model Context Protocol. Obscure at the moment, at least. Well, first of all, let me show you this thing in action. It's pretty crazy. When you look at it, so what's happening here is that I've given it this big prompt that says to call these other oracles, these other things to come up with random stuff, and it's actually following a multi-step set of instructions to gather this information, kind of like it would search the web, and then come up with an adventure. So it's getting information and then synthesizing it all together and also figuring out how to construct it together. And then you have an adventure you can start with. So how do you get to doing that? Well, let's start by looking at what prompts are. So in Model Context Protocol, or MCP, you've got tools, which everyone is familiar with. They're nowadays the best kind of thing to use. But there's this other thing called a prompt. And as always, when you read the initial description, it is both mysterious and important. What exactly does this mean? It enables servers to define reusable prompt templates and workflows. Cool. That clients can surface to users and LLMs. Now, if you listen to some of the kind of lore of how this stuff came up, I think a lot of Model Context Protocol came up basically by, I forget their names, and I apologize, by developers using IDEs who wanted a better way to program that interaction. And a prompt, kind of the first canonical examples, which I couldn't find, I forget where it is that you would have a slash command, like /get check my code in, or /analysis and analyze my code for me. And so if you look at the structure, right, you just, it's the same sort of thing. It's, as you see in a lot of MCP stuff, you send in some text and an argument, and then you're off to the races. Now down here are the typical examples that you usually see with prompts. And so you could imagine you have a git commit prompt that, I don't know, maybe you type in /get and it goes somewhere, and it says that it'll generate a concise description. And basically, what's happening is when a simple prompt like this is used, is it's really just taking this text. And you do that in the code, as you can kind of see. And then you just append some parameter that was passed in. And maybe you also could append like changes that you looked up in the code. So a lot of what you see in examples of prompts are exactly that. You pass in some text. A greeting one is popular, right? If you had a greeting prompt that just said, "Hello, Wendy," or "Hello, Michael," you would pass in your name, and then it goes all the way to the MCP prompt code, and it goes all the way back to the code, and then sends back a prompt that is given to Claude, the MCP client, and it figures out what to do with it. So the prompt might say, "Give a warm greeting to Wendy," and then it would give you a warm greeting, which is fine, but it takes a little bit of imagination to think about what you would do with it. So I've been thinking about what to do with a prompt for a while. Now, whenever I start a D&D game, you have to say like, "Let's start a D&D game. I am playing Sven. Look up the DM journal." Now, you remember a DM journal is where it's a very crude way to have the chat DM, as I call it, have memory. But instead of that, you can make a prompt. Now, you could paste in a prompt like this again, but just as a simple example, you can have a prompt that does this bootstrapping for you. In Claude, as with resources that we saw last episode, prompts are kept in this little pluggy thing. And this is going to introduce the first thing that's annoying about how prompts are implemented in Claude. I think there's a lot of UX issues with prompts in Claude here. But we go here and, you can see we've got the MCP server I work on. I should rename it sometime. But you come in here and you'll recognize the DM journal. Don't look at this one yet. That's the exciting part we're going to get to. But here, I select this, and here you can see showing my online friends this simple prompt, and enemies, if they're watching. Like and subscribe, guys. Now, the extra info is just something I would want to say, like, "I am playing Sven, a chaotic, neutral gnome fighter." We're going to make him level 2. So we say add prompts. Now, that was pretty quick. What happened is it went back to the MCP prompt that I made using the MCP JDK, helped out by Spring AI, that the wonderful Spring AI team used. You can go check out. But what it's resulted in is just putting a text thing here. And here, I'll show you where this comes from. But here you can see I've included like this prompt that I use to start things. And you can start to see the beginning of how you coordinate with the suite of tools that you have, right? So I think about all the MCP tools that I have as like, I call it the Easy Chat DM, but it's really a suite of related tools. So knowing that, I can tell it that it has all these tools at its disposal and kind of give it some information about how to use it. And then you'll remember I added some extra player information. And this is where it's like a greeting. I'm passing back the name, but you can see it passed back the value that I put in there. So we'll pass that in here, and it's a good way to bootstrap into the adventure. So you can see, and if you remember, the way that I do this stuff is, it's reading from the journal, is I store most of these as files in a dot directory. And so you could come in and change this prompt around for what you wanted to use. You're seeing some Oracle stuff there, but you can see it kind of going through this and starting to use it, which is delightful. So let's look at how that very simple Oracle is made. Let me find it. So here we have the wonderfully named DM MCP Prompt, right? And there aren't Spring AI or Spring annotations around it. So you have to do this on your own, like we did with resources. But because it's using Spring, once you just make a class as a service here, and, I haven't really coded Java since 2005, so I'm just barely getting used to this stuff. The way I think about what Spring is doing here is once you mark something as a service or a component, there's some difference, which is fantastic. Good for them, the differences. Then you can go through and mark these things as beans. And as long as you know that somewhere in the way that Spring is having the MCP JDK do things, you basically just create a list of these things that you want. And eventually when it builds the server, which is fun to dig down in the code and see how it happens, there's a lot going on there. But all you need to do is make some method that returns a list of prompt specifications. You can have as many as you want because it'll just stack these up. And you mark it as a bean, and that will get called and loaded up as a prompt, as we saw with resources, tools, all the stuff. Let me show you the core of what's going on here. Whenever you start using the MCP JDK, the core of what you end up doing is building these specifications, right? And when you build them, you typically handle the request coming in, and then you have the response that you build up as well. The first thing you do is you're specifying a prompt, right? So we're going to look at this. So here is me making the prompt. Now, if we go back to Claude, if we look at this again, right? So choose an integration. Remember, we're going to use a starter prompt. So that's what's going on here, right? So this prompt gives instructions, blah, blah, blah. This prompt gives instructions, blah, blah, blah. And then it's telling it the two parameters. There's the context one that, I just like to have to spy on things, and that extra info that I filled out, right? And, it's an interesting place to put that right here. Oh, do I need, I guess I do need these like ridiculous things here. They kind of annoy me that you need to have these in here, but that's fine. I guess you could just do this business, right? That is much nicer than putting an S in. Who really needs this S business? I mean, it should. If you wrap it like this, it should know to put a space in. When would you not want a space in there? And why would that be more important than having a space in there? I think the precedent is that you would always want a space if you were doing this, because this is like human readable, human constructible stuff. So a space would be cool. I don't know if I got that right. I'm not going to do a whole other jokey thing where I call myself while I'm brushing my teeth to correct myself. I get stuff to do today. So you can see I specify that prompt. Now, here's one thing I found really helpful to start doing in the MCP stuff. Because of the way builders work nowadays, I guess a style. This is actually MCP schema prompt, right? And if you're using it in the way the many examples do it, you type it in this way. But that's just a lot of stuff. So just by virtue of importing this, I don't have to do that whole thing again, which maybe is obvious to people who do a lot of Java. So sorry that I went over that, but I found it a very exciting revelation when I got to this. So you build up the prompt, which, looks pretty heinous, but it's really because you're building these arguments and things like this. I went and made a builder to use this, kind of old school, my 2005 Java vibes, and I thought it was nicer. But then I got a lecture by ChatGPT that's not really the way things work nowadays. So I went back to just doing this, and I don't know, maybe that makes me cool. So then, like I said, you're going to build up a sync prompt specification, and these are let's take a look at it really quick. Pretty informative. But here you can see an example of what it's like, a simplistic example of building up a prompt, right? So you got a specification, that prompt you pass in, you're going to have one of these little lambdas that you have. And you remember the exciting exchange object. That's kind of context information from being called in. You go in, and this is an example of like, the simple one is the request had some bit of code which no one typed in. This kind of example is assuming that you have something more advanced than Claude, right? Where the user is not necessarily building up the entire request, but the MCP client like Claude is doing a lot of that work for you. So it just puts this code in here, and then you can just it's not even doing the analysis. It's just telling Claude to do the analysis, the prompt result. So that's what we got going on here. So in order to do that, we've already built up the prompt, right? And then we pass in a handler that has that exchange in the request. So what goes in the request? What we do here is essentially we load up this prompt that I've typed up. It's just a text file that gets stored. Well, it's not a text file. It's a string template file that gets stored in the... I sure do swallow a lot. Let me get some water here. Delicious mineral water. What really makes something mineral water? Do they inject it with more minerals than the water already had? And what are those minerals? Not really sure. So the core of what's going on here, the goal is really just to read in a file and return it. And I store, these, if you remember, these files just get stored in a dot directory in my home directory, and we'll just go ahead and open up. I use a string template for fun mostly, and because you can have comments, which I enjoy. But you can see it's what you would expect of a prompt for having an AI be a DM for you. And the only thing that's a little weird or interesting is because it's a string template, I optionally add that extra information from the players if there is any. There's a bit of an annoyance in how this gets done, but we'll just skip over that for now. So let's go back to the prompt, right? So you can kind of get a sense of what's going on. So in case we don't find that file, right? Like from my enterprise Java development days, I'm always paranoid about, errors and defaults. So we've got a very simplistic, is that not how guidance is spelled? Guidance prompt that can be used there. Now, you remember we had this, we're going to pass in extra information. I haven't figured out how to have the string template just ignore that. So in case that argument's not passed in, even though it's required, I create a dummy one so it doesn't freak out. It took me several hours to figure out what was going on there. Super annoying. And then don't worry about this. This is just a little thing I wrote that reads a file. You can go check it out if you really want to. It processes it. Right. And then, if there's some error, it's going to return that default prompt that we had. Right. So we'll always have some nice default there. And then this is where we build up the what's handed back for the prompt. Right. So you got a request for the prompt coming in and a result. And I'm not really sure what it does with this description, but that's fine. And all that's really happening here, let's look at the code for this, right? Is you're just passing back a description and a message. So this is something I haven't considered. You could add multiple messages in response, which I'm going to have to think about what to do with that. And once you package all of that up in a result, you just return that out of your funky little Lambda, because apparently people hate inner classes, which is fine. Then there you go. You return that list of prompt stuff. So what we've done here is, and I'll go over this because I won't go over it again when I do the more exciting thing, is, your Spring Boot app starts up. Knows how to call all these different methods. At some point, it calls startup prompt, which just throws this prompt specification into Spring Boot Beanland. I think that's the technical term for it. And then eventually, when it builds out the MCP server, it's going to find all of those prompts that you have floating around there, and then that goes over to your MCP client and tells it that it has prompts. And then here you are, with the ability to click on this and see the various prompts that you have, right? The startup one. So that's interesting. And you can start to see how you could do some interesting stuff with it, especially if you wanted to come in and tune this. And the nice thing about tuning it is, since it's stored in a directory, you don't have to recompile and restart things. And the way that I have this written, maybe it's not the best thing, but it reads this file every time. So you could be modifying it and bring it up over and over again to test it out. But let me go back to that example that I think was much more exciting, where we're going to initiate setting up an adventure. So let's say we're in here, right? And I wanted to come up with an adventure. This is interesting and important because for the 2 or so years I've been playing D&D with AI things. While it's imaginative, it's the kind of unstructuredness of how it thinks and works is actually not the best for adventures, right? It tends to want to please you with the adventures that it picks, kind of even make it easy, and it's almost not random enough in what it does, right? It needs some almost constraints of randomness that you give it. Otherwise, it kind of just defaults defaults to cliche stuff, which makes sense for an LLM as far as I know how it works, because it's always trying to predict the most likely thing that comes next, right? And so if it's been trained on a lot of role-playing game things and stories in general, it's going to kind of come up with the ones that are the most cliche and the most used, which is not really that much fun all the time. So it's good to rely on these Oracle things from solo role-playing, which kind of randomly pick from big tables of things. And that's what this prompt is going to do. So here, I'm going to rely on some of the files by the guy who does the Plot Unfolding Machine, which is a great solo role-playing system I recommend. There's a good app for it. There's all sorts of companion things to it. But a year ago or so, he made a Spanso, if I'm saying that right, sort of plugin called Play by Writing that allows you to basically type in kind of like completions would be for prompts where you do that slash stuff. But it allows you to bring in a lot of different oracles just to randomly pick things. And if you go to his Play by Writing project, there's this directory called Tables where he or someone has painstakingly gone in and typed up all of these Oracle tables, right? You can see where, like, if you're familiar with Mythic, like he's typed in all of the things from Mythic there. So this is a great resource when you're doing this kind of coding. Now, what I'm going to do is he has something called the Game Unfolding Machine, or GUM, cleverly named. He has this one thing called full, which I guess is a little hard to read here, but I'll show you. But what it's doing is it calls to multiple oracles to build up kind of the structure of an adventure. So let's look at this. So again, with the way that I do this, right, I'm going to start with a text file. So this is going to be a prompt that we use to create an adventure. Let's look at it really quick so you can kind of see the UI, right? Again, we come in here in this clunky interface, but that's the way it goes. Adventure Maker. Now, you can see always I add context, and this is going to be how long do you want the adventure to be, right? So you just have 10 minutes or do you have 5 months? We'll see what it even does with that. So you can see it's this prompt that will give you a template for creating an adventure. Thrilling description on my part. As you'll kind of see with a lot of MCP stuff, most of the interesting things happens in this natural language, not in the actual code that you're doing. And this is where that is going to be especially interesting and true, because you're going to see the AI start to be the orchestrator, the one that's running things instead of me programming it. So we've got instructions about how to do it, right? It's always good to remind it what you're doing. You can see you're going to give it the prompt, and there's going to be references, as we'll see, to these other oracles. And I want it to call on these oracles and fill out the prompt, and then also rely on its context memory, right? Like I'm kind of giving it the instructions of like all the stuff you would do to come up with an adventure, rolling with random things from oracles, do all of that, along with, I think, some error handling. I don't know if it matters, right? And I thought for fun, they're always saying that you should treat your LLMs as humans, even though apparently it costs millions of dollars. Poor OpenAI, having to pay millions of dollars for us to think the future overlords of the world. But this is instructions for building up an adventure. So what I'm telling it is, it's got a location, what location is it going to use? What's the background problem? This is a pretty good, you can see how you would make an adventure out of that. Especially, this is I think the most clever part is the caveat at the bottom. The clever thing that's going to happen here is I've told it to call out to these other oracles by names. I won't show you the Oracle tool. You can go to the Easy Chat DM repo and look at it. But there's going to be another tool that it can call and pass in this name to get the result of that oracle. Let's just look at the code very briefly. So like I said, you make a service thing. You got a whole deal here. We're telling it where to find the prompt. And if you remember from past episodes, I've got my silly little file repository thing. Obviously, if you're doing a more advanced version, you could have this hook up to a database somewhere. You might be running it in a Tanzu platform, a Cloud Foundry, and you could have it auto bind to a database. You could manage that, do all sorts of rights management. And that's where you'd really get into this analogy of doing enterprise applications with this. Maybe in future episodes, I'll show hooking up to a database. It'd actually be really good because then you could do RAG stuff and all sorts of thrilling things. So as ever, you just mark something as a bean and you return a list of the kind of thing that you want. Here, a prompt. And you can see I build up the prompt first, right? Which is just saying what this prompt is. Again, if we come look here, this is a prompt that will give you a template. This is a prompt that'll give you a template. That's what I'm doing here. There's one argument. Well, there's two arguments. There's context as always in the length that I want the adventure to be. And then we come down to our little thing where we make the specification, which binds together the prompt and the way that it's going to respond. And as always, or as frequently. I have a default that I want to give it. So let's say adventure, share the adventures. Oh, there you go. All right. Just in case something doesn't work, and there, we've got to set a default for our variables. Kind of annoying thing. Maybe I'll stop using a string template because of that kind of stuff, but whatever. Or just learn what I'm doing better. And then this is just a method that retrieves wherever that went, our big adventure maker file, and it will write in the link. So I passed in 30 minutes. It'll write that in there for us. And then we do the stuff, right? We're replying with the result that we have, and then it's only for the assistant. It's text content, and then blah, 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 package it up, and then you're good to go. So let's see how this works, right? Because this is where I think it's really fun and exciting. So here, the context is always showing people how this works, even people who don't care. Like and subscribe, folks. I should probably put some exclamation marks there. Okay, so how long do we want it to be? Let's see what happens if we say 5 minutes. You gotta watch this, because it'll pop up some things, but then it's gonna get to the exciting part where it's actually going through, I would say, a simplistic agentic flow, where it's figuring out a bunch of things to string together, giving you a result. So we've added this prompt, and just to go full circuit, right? You can see we've already looked at this text file, and the one thing we passed in, 5 minutes long, thrilling. So let's have it execute it. Now it's gonna think a bit, and hopefully it'll work. Still thinking. I might have to go see what the problem is. Yep, still not working. Let's restart it. All right, I'm trying it again. I just recompiled everything and rebooted. Let's see what happens. There we go. So you see it had to ask me permission to use the named oracles, but it only does it once, which is nice. And then let's bring this up kind of in parallel so you can start to see how it's following probably the outline here, right? So it started with the location, right? And then it went on to the setup background, right? So it figured out the oracles to call, which is, isn't this thrilling? This is so much fun that it's doing this. And then it goes on and on. So what is it now? I need to determine opposition. So so there we go. See, they have a powerful agent with abilities. And this is where, again, it's counterintuitive, but I think it's kind of better to feed the LLM stuff like this, to not let it be so imaginative and creative, because its imagination can be kind of boring. And then you remember I told it to add a journal entry, if you remember back to the second episode or whatever, I forget, third or second. So here it's stored the adventure. There we go. Now it's gotten to it. This does seem kind of simple, right? But what we've seen here is, I think, again, a very simple idea of what agentic AI is. Now, you can think of a classic agentic AI thing, make me a restaurant reservation, right? And you would send a prompt in that had instructions like this about, the formula, the recipe you wanted for looking for things, and told it the tools that it should look up. How's the weather? Here's a resource. Remember, you can return multiple things. Look up information about me, the kind of food that I want, and so forth and so on, right? So you have a recipe, and then it would call through all these different tools and kind of imagine the kind of place you would want to go to. And if you had a tool that could even call out to make a reservation, it could do that. So I don't know if that's the intention of a prompt, but I think it is. One of the many intentions is you can start to orchestrate things, as I keep saying. So now what you can do to extend that is I can go in and, I can edit these instructions that I have. I could go in, I could add even more oracles or take oracles away, whatever you might want to do. I could add more prompts. So you could have a whole prompt. The next one I was thinking of is make me an NPC. Whenever an NPC is encountered, you would have to manually give it the prompt. Totally annoying. But you could say have the user give you a prompt to create an NPC. And, of course, you could run the prompt and then have that call a tool to write things out and do other stuff, whatever it may be. But I think that hopefully gives you an idea of what prompts can be used for, what they are, and it'll start to give you an idea of how you code them and how you think of organizing your stuff, right? The kind of plain text of what the prompt is, maybe coming up with a system to reference other tools inside your prompts that I've borrowed from the plot unfolding machine fella, and start to imagine what you would do with it. Well, if you enjoyed this, there's at least 3, if I haven't made more, videos in the series going over the basics of what Model Context Protocol is in a very basic tool, a more advanced tool for doing things, and then exploring what a resource is, like a chunk of data. And of course, if you want to check out the code for this, it might be a little different by the time you see it, but it's just here at the Easy Chat DM project, and you can kind of see the progression from the very simplistic tools to prompts and whatever else we have going on here. And with that, I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.